Here is an easy street scene for you to paint in watercolor, a simple composition, simple shapes to deal with, and simple colors as well. Hello, my name is Tim Wilmot, a watercolor painter, a creator here on YouTube, creating lots of watercolor tutorials for you to have a go at. And in this watercolor demonstration, I'm going to be painting the scene in Clitheroe, Lancashire, lovely, pretty town. This is a late summer's day looking against the light, contre jour, which gives us some very simple shapes to contend with, silhouetted shapes of lighter cars against the darker background, the darker castle against the lighter background of the sky. In this video, I'm going to go through what I'm discussing now, the actual image itself, the source photo, the inspiration for my painting, and then I'll go through in real time, the individual steps, the stages of doing a watercolor painting with, first of all, the outline drawing, getting in the main shapes of the objects in my composition, then laying down the wash, then adding in some darker colors to create detail and shadows and shade, and then finally the detail stage to add in more details of smaller objects, windows, figures, and the like. So, as I say, this is Clitheroe, this is Castle Street, looking up towards the castle there, high up on this little hill, this little lump there, and quite a simple scene. The only difficulty really is to get the perspective right. So on the left-hand side, in our initial drawing, trying to think about those main lines there. So we're actually looking up slightly uphill, and then on the right hand side maybe less steep there, almost horizontal here, that side of the street. I'm going to be including some vehicles, some cars. Do you shy away from drawing in cars? Do you have a difficulty painting cars? Well, I'm going to cover that on this video, trying to keep those shapes really simple. As we can see here, these are really simple looking towards us. So we've got the basic shape, almost like an A with a slight angle on the left and the right hand side, then a simple, almost rectangle for the windscreen. So that's going to be darker in there, and then that's going to be darker there, and then that very simple shadow coming out from it. So simple car shapes and simple figures. Let's zoom into a figure. Really simple shapes, so the top of the head, body, and simple legs, and then the shadow coming off to the left-hand side. So there we are. That's the subject, Clitheroe, Lancashire, looking towards the castle, Castle Street. Let's see how we get on. First step then, the drawing, and the paper I'm using, as per normal, is Saunders Waterford cold press, 300 grams, 140 pounds, and it's 15 inches by 11 inches in dimension, held down by some masking tape. Now I'm drawing in the simple shapes, first of all, of the castle, and then the apex of the rooftops on the right-hand side, trying to get that triangle of the front of the building just right and the perspective. And then continuing up the right-hand side, again thinking about the perspective and the top of the roof and the bottom of the roof. And then on that right-hand side, framing it from a composition point of view. I think it's quite nice to have a frame there, some kind of taller object going down the right-hand side, which is that building. Now up on the left-hand side, again, think about perspective. The rooftops, keeping it fairly simple. When I come to the painting stage, I'll suggest a bit more of the bits and pieces on top of the rooftops, chimneys and so on. And then the very end of that left-hand row of shops, then the middle of the buildings with the blinds, the base of these buildings just curving around just slightly towards me, and then frame on the left hand side with this building. It's got some lovely cornerstones on this building. Again, thinking about perspective here with those corner blocks. I'm using a 3B pencil, so the lines are going to be quite dark for me to, this will be quite dark enough for them to show through the transparent layers of watercolour. A car almost in the middle, not dead centre, but a car just parked, quite a big car on the left hand side there. Could be an SUV or van or something. Just some more shapes to fill in the gap between the left and the right side. And then in the road, a couple of cars in motion coming towards us. I'm not sure this is a one-way street in Castle Street here. Maybe a local can pop in the comments whether it's a one-way or not. Any Clitheroe locals. A shop blind there, and the front edge to that shop blind. Then just going down a bit further, smaller one, narrow one. Again, the lip, the edge on the front. And a few shoppers, some figures on the left. Keep them nice and simple. You see the way I do my figures. I start with the head, just a bit of a hoop, and then the upper part of the body fairly quickly, and then probably even quicker, just doodle in the legs. I find sometimes the more time you spend on a figure, the more unnatural it can sometimes look, whereas a figure quickly drawn can have a sense of freshness and spontaneity. Right, down the middle, there's the edge of the pavement. Again, a few lines for perspective. Coming down from that parked car on the left. Above the castle, there's a flag. Now, maybe I didn't necessarily need to draw that in. I could have perhaps have just painted that in freehand, just to prevent any unnecessary pencil marks showing in the sky, because the sky is going to be quite light. That's going to be the lightest area of the painting. So I don't want any unnecessary pencil lines showing through that clear sky. A little sign here in front of the car, just another interesting shape. We can always, with a street like this, we can always add in things on the pavement, on the sidewalk there too. Just to add in a bit more interest, bits and pieces from shops, these A-board advertising signs, just make these lines a little bit darker. The drawing stage has to be just right before committing to doing any painting, because with watercolour it can be sometimes quite difficult if the drawing is not too good to try and pull things back at the painting stage can be sometimes quite difficult. Over on the right hand side, almost a mirror image of the left, really, with a few shop lines catching some light, hopefully. The light is, as I say, is coming towards us. It's a contre jour scene, so simple shapes silhouetted against maybe a lighter shape silhouetted against a darker background, or a darker object against a lighter background. I sometimes just cross-hatch the faces of figures just to really help me see the direction these figures might be going, in this example, coming towards us. Probably it's a good idea with a street scene with a number of figures to vary the figures and have them different sizes of figures, going in different directions as well. Right, so that's the drawing done. Now for the initial wash, the second stage of my painting process. And I'm pre-wetting the sky because I want a nice even wash on this sky. So pre-wet that area. I'm using a very soft brush. This is a Raphael soft aqua brush, size 6, this brush, so a medium to large size. It's gonna hold a lot of water, a lot of paint, without me having to keep going back to mix extra. So I've pre-wet the sky, all the sky, and over the edges of the rooftops, and now with a slight gradient on my board, there's a slight inclination of the board, maybe by about 10 or 15 degrees. Started there at the top, fairly thick, and then just drag that down. The water in the paper is just going to make it weaker as I come down the page. And now the base colour of the buildings, which will be the eventual colour of the rooftops and the shop blinds that are hitting the light. I don't have to pay too much attention to the colour at this stage. It's more really the value that I want. And remember, with watercolour, things have a habit of drying lighter than we see right now. So I need to I need to think about that as the intensity of the paint I'm mixing, maybe just compensate for that, the lightness. Down to the tops of the cars, which I will leave unpainted, and I'll paint around some of the figures as well. Not because they're all going to be left white, but little bits of it will be left white. Down the left-hand side, this will be the eventual colour of this, the base colour of that building. So I need to get that right, as well as the value. I'm trying to think of the colour and the value, all right, the two things at the same time. And then you see with a brush like this, you can be quite precise painting around figures. If you've got a brush with a mop brush with a good edge and a good point, you can be quite precise with your painting around. It doesn't need to be perfect. Sometimes a bit of if you've gone over a line, that little imperfection can be one of the charms of the freshness of a watercolour. So it doesn't need to be absolutely correct. Now, like the wall on the left-hand side, this pavement here is going to be the end colour I'm going to be left with. So I am trying to make this as accurate as I can as regards the colour. Sort of quite a warm colour of this pavement, and then maybe a little bit cooler with the road, so I added a bit of blue. Oh, I should go through my colours on the right hand side. If you've seen in my previous videos, the palette is unchanged. So from the top, just mixed a bit of burnt sienna there with some ultramarine blue. Right, colours from the top. Neutral tint, which could be a Payne's grey, neutral tint, then burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre. Just use a burnt sienna then. Where was I? Yellow ochre, viridian green, cobalt green, cerulean blue, cobalt blue in the middle, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson. A bit more burnt sienna there. Bit of touch of ultramarine blue. Continuing down, so I mentioned alizarin crimson, a Windsor red, a light red, and then a cadmium orange, a lemon yellow right at the bottom, and there's a lavender as well right down the bottom. You can see there in the middle, which I sometimes use. Quite a nice opaque colour. Great to mix with some browns for distant hills. Now, a bit of lifting out here. The little groove between the pavement slabs. So the paint is still damp, and I'm using a thinner brush, a synthetic brush. Dip it in some clear water. Over to the right hand side is my water container, me being right-handed. Dip the brush in the water, take most of the water off so that the brush is going to suck up the paint, and as long as the paper is still quite damp, we can get these lighter marks appearing. And thinking about perspective again, these lines are going to be quite wide, coming towards us, and narrow. So as I come down, I'm applying more pressure on the brush, lightly, light in the distance, and then apply more pressure as I come down towards me, so we get that wider line. And then I've got a sponge over on the right hand side as well, just to mop up any excess moisture on that brush. And likewise on the right hand side, just to have a little bit more lifting off there where the sunlight is hitting that right hand pavement. Maybe a little bit of lifting off there on the left hand side, just mixing up the intensity of the lighter areas on that left hand side and the shop blind. Just a little bit more there. There I see, in the water, pinch the brush, squeeze the water off. Luckily I've got a protective mat below me, so I'm not damaging my carpet or whatever. But dip it in the water, squeeze off the brush, and that for me is just the right amount of moisture on that brush to then hit that surface, touch the surface, and we've got a bit of gentle lifting off. That's the second stage done. That the initial wash and a bit of lifting out, just painting in the underlying colours and the sky, parts of the buildings, blinds and the road. That is the end colour, apart from the shadows going across them. That's the end colour, bit of detail as well. Just while this is drying, so I'm using a hairdryer to speed up the drying process here. If you want to attend any of my live watercolour, my watercolour live online workshops, please go to crowdcast.io/Tim Wilmot. You'll see all the details there of up and coming workshops throughout the year, normally on a monthly basis, different topics and suitable for all levels of watercolour painters, beginners, intermediate, advanced, all welcome to all have a go at the subjects I set. Generally landscapes, seascapes, street scenes, bit of a mixture, and a great opportunity to paint along and get a critique. You can also sign up for previous workshops as well. They're all recorded, so these workshops, the recording is made and you can play back the recording as many times as you want. There's no limit, and they're going to be there for quite a few years, I guess. So yeah, have a go. Look forward to seeing you on a workshop. Go to crowdcast.io/Tim Wilmot, and look forward to seeing you on those and looking at your paintings, giving you a critique. This next stage is the other details, and this is where I'm going to be adding in depth. So it's not details, it's more the darks. Scrub that. This is more the darks and shadows. This is where we are adding in depth to the painting, starting with, at the end of the street, there's some trees going up on the slopes towards the castle. Now I want to keep this fairly simple, not too dark, especially towards the top, not too dark. As I say, nice and simple, just to give the impression of something at the end of the street and a little bit of darkness behind the lightness of the cars. So I mixed up that green there with a bit of ultramarine blue and the yellow. I'm using a smaller mop brush now. This is a natural squirrel mop brush, medium size. I'm going a little bit darker, a little bit thicker towards the base of these trees, painting around the cars again. So they're just starting to show their shapes there a bit more. Again, this brush has got quite a good edge to it, so I can be quite precise and accurate with my painting around different objects like these cars. Dab a little blue back up in the upper story of those trees. And then just while that canopy of trees is still quite damp, I'm dropping in the silhouetted shape of the castle. Very simple shape, not too difficult at all. Just to suggest the shape of that castle up there, and letting that colour drip down into the still wet colour of the trees. You can see it just glistening there a little bit. It's just all mixing in with each other, and I'll just let it do its stuff. With the slope on the board, it just helps guide the paint down a bit. Down the end of the street, first building at the end there, a little bit of light on the top ridge of the roof. And a chimney. Quite simple again. A little bit of blue there. Cerulean blue and a cobalt blue to paint the front of the building. Merge it in a little bit with the trees to the left, down to the tops of the cars. If you want to get more involved on some painting projects, then take a look at my Patreon site. Patreon is a very common system, website, platform, call it what you will, that's used by a lot of creators, musicians, artists to help share their work in a way that's not possible with YouTube. And up on Patreon, if you go to patreon.com/Tim Wilmot. So this is different from Crowdcast and the live online workshops. I've got a couple of things going on here, extra things beyond this YouTube channel. So Patreon, think of Patreon a bit like a club, and you can become a member of these different clubs. There is a small fee, almost for the price of a cup of coffee a month. You can take part in lots of activities and a major painting project per month where you get a critique. Depending on what level you sign up for, you could get a video critique back from me. And there's a lively watercolor community as well, with everyone sharing their paintings. I've also got an image sharing service that I'm running up there where people can share their images that they want to, for other painters to give them a little bit of inspiration. So if you're lacking if you don't know, suddenly you've got a mental block on what to paint, then that can be quite useful. There's tens and tens of loads of different images from all around the world, different landscapes and street scenes, and we've got lots of snow scenes as well if you fancy some winter stuff. And a regular live stream as well. So a regular sort of Q&A session. Back to the painting then. We've gone over the buildings on the right, painted around those shop blinds that are catching the light, and then below those shop blinds, quite darker and thicker. And with this soft brush, it's quite nice to blend in these different areas of that right-hand side. You get a nice sort of soft edge to these different variations, the different areas of the colour. And it's nothing too severe that you might get with, say, a synthetic brush. So neutral tint there, ultramarine blue, a cool dark colour. And I'm going to come right down to the base of the building, and now for the shadows going across the street, drag that brush very quickly, and with the roughness of the paper we get a little bit of a deckled edge to that shadow. That's the edge of the pavement, and you can see I've painted around a figure on the right hand side that's walking away from us. So just need to think about the shadow for that figure. The sun is coming towards us, and it's an afternoon, a late-ish afternoon shot. So we've got some fairly long shadows here coming from these different objects. Windscreen of the far cars, and this car on the right. Not a perfect rectangle, just introduce a few little indentations and gaps just to make it a bit more interesting. And then the actual body of the car itself, joining the two cars. They are, of course, they're separated, but from a painting point of view, I'm just connecting them to this car here to the left and the right. And then darker, thicker paint, same brush, darker, thicker paint for the shadows, starting with the under the chassis of the car, a couple of wheels, of course, and then the shadow on the road, on the street, very quickly, and that's it, pretty much done. I could have left a little bit of a space for the headlamps. Well, I've got a bit of a headlamp on the right hand car, a little bit of the right side there, but I can always go in with a touch of white paint towards the end just to emphasize the headlights a little bit more. Perhaps the wing mirrors, they could be a little bit of light there just to break up the sides of the cars as well. Next, I need to go over to the left-hand side. Pretty much similar to the right-hand side, but suggesting more the form of the windows and some of the shop openings, and then the figures as well. Need to do some careful painting around those figures and their shadows. Meanwhile, the paint on the right is still moving around a little bit. Just let that dry on its own. You can see as it's drying, it's also drying a little bit lighter. I'll keep with the same size brush for the left-hand side, this medium squirrel mop brush. Start with defining the edge of the left-hand building, the dark against the light, with a cool colour, drop in a bit of orange in there, just to give a bit of extra interest with those different colours, so it's not too flat a colour. Touch of red added, and then some vertical lines to expose a bit of a lighter area there that's catching the light. Then continue on down, bit of a cooler blue, down to the tops of the shop blinds, and then with the perspective getting a bit narrower, of course, as we go to the end of the street on the left-hand side. And it's going to be, as I get down, it will be a little bit lighter up against the end of the street. Paint just carefully around the left-hand corner of that car, and then back up the street underneath the shop blinds. So neutral tint, ultramarine blue, for that darker area there in the middle, around that, paint around this figure, the left-hand figure, up to the figure just behind it. Sometimes with these random brush marks, or fairly random brush marks, you can, when you just reflect back on it, sometimes they can suggest some extra figures or objects. So it's good not to block it all in, paint over the whole area, just to leave a few little bits and pieces, some sparkles there, which could be different things, objects, people as well, extra figures that would just expose themselves, show themselves to you. This is quite an important windscreen now. I've just left a little bit of an unpainted area in the middle of that windscreen to give the impression of some sunlight hitting that, the slope of that windscreen, and now the shadow as well, just like the cars on the right, up to the side of that board with that shadow. My winds are red for the board. Doesn't matter if it blends in with the car shadow at all. Neutral tint for the shadow of the A board. This is where I need to think a little bit about the sun and the angle. You see, because we're looking directly into the sun, things on the right hand side, the shadows might go off to the right. Things on the left, they're going to go slightly off to the left, just by a few degrees or so. Bit of light red and orange there for some flesh colour, faces, arms, and then paint in their bodies, the clothing. Try and make them a little bit different, each one. It's not all too uniform. I'll have this one with maybe a jacket, just so left hand side, right hand side. Keep the middle light. Maybe the one at the back just got some darker bottoms. Keep the top light, so it's another sort of little bit of a focal point there on that left hand side. Maybe that figure white against the darker background. As in the drawing stage, painting of the legs, try not, I try, this is the way I do it, I try not to spend too much time on the legs. Nice and simple, fairly quick. The more time I spend on the legs, I find that they just start to look a little bit static and you lose that freshness. So legs and then their shadows, compensating for the direction of the sun as well, like I mentioned with the angle, looking towards the sun. In front of this shop there's some objects out on the street, some boxes or whatever, and some edges of those boxes are catching the light, and then towards us a darker shadow, cool shadow, quite blue, little bit of neutral tint, little bit of a blue, and then connect it with that figure. Maybe just paint in a bit more of this figure's legs. Just feel it needed a bit more of a connection with its shadow. but I'm conscious not to spend too much time and overdo it. And as I say, trying to make it not look too static, bit of movement in that figure. Something going on down the end of the street, little bit of a touch of a mark on that right-hand figure. I'd love to hear your comments on this video as well. If you've got any questions at all or feedback, please pop those into the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. And of course, if you haven't done already, please subscribe to my channel, the Tim Wilmot channel, to get notification of up and coming videos. Be great to have your support on that. It does send a nice little message back to Google to say that you like these tutorials, and just helps me a bit on the support side and rankings and so on. Now these cornerstones on the left, quite an important feature to frame the left. Not too much detail in them, but getting these larger ones and smaller ones, alternating those down the left-hand side, and an important gap at the top where the light is just they're slightly proud of the wall. They're slightly sort of sticking out, and the top of it is just catching the light. And then down to the bottom of the street, helps with the perspective again with those. So I drew those lines in first of all, and that really helped me see where I was painting with these blocks, with these like big bricks. I don't know what the construction term is for it, these corner blocks, cornerstones. Little bit of darkness underneath. Right up above in the top left corner, we've got a hanging basket, which I'll paint in shortly. Rooftops on the left-hand side. Burnt sienna, bit of neutral tint. Darker towards us, and then I'll get a little bit lighter going further away. So starting at the top of the chimney down to the rooftop, bit of an angle there, almost a 45-degree angle, which is, hopefully you can see, it's suggesting now the rooftops and the light, some bright light hitting those rooftops. Just extend that figure there. Maybe that figure's carrying a bag or something. That shopper. Bit more of a definition to the left-hand side of the building. And some of these buildings going down the street, they're a little bit higher than the ones next to them. So there we are, just a slight, we can see a bit of an edge to that side of that building, blending the two. So hanging basket, yellow, neutral tint, quite dry. Some random brush marks. My hand is covering up, apologies for that, but just some random brush marks there with a yellow and a neutral tint, quite dark. And I'll create some shadows behind that, bit of cobalt blue, sorry, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, and then thinking about the angle of the sun, some strokes running from on the edge of the paper, the masking tape, over to the bushes, the bit of foliage like that, just to suggest the impression of those shadows coming down that wall. Down the end of the street, it needed some extra darker values in there to create the form of the start of the right-hand building. So it's still a little bit damp, the paper, with Saunders paper and cotton-based paper. They tend to stay wetter, stay damper longer, so you've got a longer time to work on your painting. Not so pressurized with the drying time. And so I'm going in again with some slightly darker, thicker paint than, the important thing is it's got to be thicker, otherwise I would create some blooms and some cauliflowers, which may not be too good to look at. And darker, thicker paint, use my fingertips to blend in things to create a softer edge, or slightly lifting off the colour if it's gone a bit too strong. I'm using now a smaller synthetic brush for detail work. So we've done the drawing, the wash, the shadows to create depth. Now my detail stage with a smaller brush, generally darker paint, not too much water, quite thick in colour. There's the flag. Maybe a little bit too dark, not too sure, but I've done it now. And some important lines, not too many, some important lines on the right-hand side to emphasize the perspective of the buildings on the right there, just underneath the edge of the roof. Not continuous lines, bit of a lost and found, some gaps in those lines. We'll suggest some windows as well. There's a little bit of light here on the right-hand side, perhaps some reflected light coming into those. I'm keeping it nice and easy, no detail in those windows. I'm not painting individual window frames and the panes of the windows, just the suggestion of a few shapes there. And use my fingertips. I could use carefully, I could use a paper towel or a damp brush to lift off some of that paint, but I just tend to use my fingertips. Just need to be careful with those fingertips not to smudge the lighter areas just below where I am now. On the right hand side, still on the right hand side, some shop windows. I think actually it's a hotel on the immediate right. I think, is it Royal Castle, I think, on the right-hand side. But anything on the right, I don't want to put too much detail in there. I want the focus to be in the middle portion of the painting. So I've got to be careful here not to overdo any detail there, especially down the far end of these buildings, the far end of the street. There are lots of windows, and the more you look at the photograph, the more windows you see, the more details you might see. But that can be a danger in falling into that difficulty of thinking that you've got to paint every single window. So like I did on the right, now over to the left, and a bit more detail to the underneath of the edge of the roof and these windows. Add in a little bit of darker paint in that whiter gap. And with this synthetic brush, I can get some nice dry brush marks, which I find quite nice to look at. Just the way you get these marks appearing from a dry brush stroke, and then just leave it, not overdo it. Down to the end of the street, making the windows a little bit narrower as I go down, closer together and lighter. So those three qualities really going down. And there might be some going down, there might be some square signs jutting out from the shops as well, just to break up that line of windows. Left-hand edge of the nearest shop blind and some window, some shop openings just below that blind. Given that figure a little bit of a beard, I think that one doesn't matter. Might need to use a little bit of white paint towards the end just to add a few highlights on some of the objects there on the left. These cars have got some detail on the front that just makes them a little bit more realistic. And with this brush, I can now add in a few more details of the blocks, the pavement slabs or blocks, these horizontal lines going across the street. Not all of them. When I look at the image, I can see some that are darker than others, where there's maybe a bigger gap, or maybe some debris has gone in there, it just makes them a little bit darker. And they're not, all of them are not perfectly horizontal as well. They're at a slight angle just to suggest a bit of a gradient in the in the pavement. Like the windows, not painting in every single line, and have some of these lines a little bit thicker, closer to us. And as my brush is running out of paint, I'm going to get some lighter lines, which is actually quite nice. And I can use that going a little bit further towards the middle. Just fill in this area here a little bit more. Maybe some darker, thicker gap there. And then a edge to the pavement, a few little dots on the road. And I'm going to now add in some yellow, some double yellow lines, the no parking lines down the side. That can also help lead the eye into the composition with that brighter colour. Bit thicker coming down towards me, applying a bit more pressure on the brush. And a second one, not perfectly parallel, and some gaps in that line as well, where typically the paint comes off and you don't have a continuous yellow line. With that same yellow, I'll just dab a little bit over on the right hand side. Could be little things in the windows or some flowers, hanging baskets. Continuing on with the darker paint now. A bit more detail in those middle shops. Let's get in a darker shop opening there, and that gives me an opportunity to add in a bit of darkness against the lighter figure, a bit more of a difference in the contrast. A few more verticals. Tidy up that figure on the right, which is quite easy to do when it's light like that, just bringing in the darker surrounding area closer into it if the figure was too large. Bit of shadow underneath these cornerstones, just that bottom edge. Just like I did with the pavement, same brush. And connect that bottom stone with the with those marks. Perhaps a few more bits of shadow against that yellow paint. That it can be, in the UK, it can be quite thick. These blobs of yellow. So tiny bit of shadow on the left hand side. There's a few cracks in the road, so I'll suggest those with a few dry brush marks going across the street, which just helps give the impression of the slight curve of the road as well. and the gradient. Now, what I like to do generally on my paintings, just to add a bit more sparkle and a bit more light to certain areas, is very carefully use some white paint with a small brush with a good point and just add in a bit of extra light to some of the leading edges of some objects catching the light. I need to add in a few on the figures here, top of the head, on the shoulder. Particularly effective when you've got a darker background. Well, it's even more effective. You've got a dark figure against a darker background, just to suggest extra things there. That line could be a distant car, a shop blind. It is important with this white paint not to overdo it and to not make it, to actually have the paint not too thick and not too wet, if you see what I mean. It does take a little bit of practice just to get it right. Could be a little lamp post in the end there. Some horizontal lines on these objects on the pavement. Blocking that area there. Some reflected light against the window. Perhaps just a few more on the pavement, just a few little dots. And that's it done. Here is the end painting then. I like to do a little bit of a summary of the painting now that I've completed it, just to reflect on what I was trying to achieve and look at things that worked okay or that I thought worked okay, maybe some things that didn't work okay. So the subject, the objective was to take this scene in Clitheroe, Lancashire, and a contre jour view towards the castle in the distance, and creating an easy street scene, a very simple street scene with some silhouetted shapes, shops on the left, shops on the right, a few cars and a few figures, but keeping things nice and simple, simple shapes and a simple range of colours and values as well. So composition-wise, I'm quite happy with that. I was careful to try and avoid this kind of central area here. I don't want that focal point in that middle. So maybe that figure there could be a focal point. Maybe your eyes go over to that single figure there on the right-hand side. But there's nothing stopping us having multiple focal points. But it was a scene where you can really use your imagination to mix things up if you want to adjust the orientation of the cars, the configuration of the cars, and have more people on the right-hand side and less people on the left. Doesn't matter, just make it up. But quite a simple scene leading up towards the castle, keeping the background, the value of the background, not too dark, not too light. Very simple though. Yes, we can hopefully see that it sort of looks like a castle, maybe the flag just helps that suggestion as well. And then using negative shapes to create the light on the rooftops and the cars here as well. I laid down that first wash. I pre-wet the paper in the top part of the screen. And then as we came down, I just laid in some colour over pretty much the whole scene, apart from those areas I wanted to keep light or just wanted to paint them in a different way. And those figures, I painted around those figures as well. The perspective was an important element of this. Probably that's the only difficult thing, was that perspective, getting that right. And that was the importance of that drawing stage, to get that left hand edge right, and then the right hand, oops, the right hand side, let's just do that again. The right hand side, trying to get that just right, maybe not so steep on that right hand side, not so steep as on the left hand side, and then the base of the shops on the right hand side, something like that there. And then these lines here as well, they help sort of draw the eye into the scene, as well as those yellow lines. A number of different watercolor techniques were used as well. I mentioned the wash. I did a bit of lifting off with those gaps down the street here. A little bit of lifting off on the shop blinds as well. I did a bit of wet in wet as I was adding in colour, thicker colour into an already damp area and getting some nice soft edges, that wet in wet technique. Then some dry brush marks as I used down here and in the details of the buildings as well, and a bit of body colour with that white paint, just taking the paint right out the tube, but trying to be very careful with that white paint. Hope you liked it. Catch up with you on the next video.